Welcome. I'm Doug Morgan, and you're listening to Uncommon Sense, where we hunt for the truth in the topics you're not supposed to talk about, Christianity and politics. Despite what the no kings people say, constitutionally we have three divisions of government. Congress, that makes laws, the judiciary, that provides justice, and the executive branch, that executes those constitutional laws. And arguably, in recent years, there has been a shift in power among the branches. The Congress, for instance, has done, two notable things. One, they have set up a bureaucracy that has no executive branch oversight. And we're going to talk a little bit about that in just a little bit. The other thing that legislators are doing now is passing very vague laws so as to not take on any responsibility for their actions. If they pass a law, for instance, that isn't specific at all, and some bureaucracy or some bureaucratic agency or bureaucrat somewhere, if they do some terrible things, or they make some unpopular type of regulation or whatever, well, it wasn't the legislators' fault, right? As long as they can get reelected, everything is fine with them, of course. Well, the executive branch has changed some as well over the years, especially with the leadership void created by Congress. The executive branch has taken on more and more power as the years go by. In fact, if you remember right, President Barack Obama famously stated, quote, "I've got a pen and I've got a phone." What did he mean by that? He meant that he could do anything that he wanted with or without Congress. And we can't leave out the judiciary branch, though. Activists, judges are they have failed to do their job and provide justice. They believe that they are legislators and that their job is to create laws. Most of these judges are just leftist liberal judges, and they act according to their ideology. The problem with this is that if a society loses faith in their judiciary to provide justice, well, bad things happen. Let me give you some examples. With the first two of these examples coming out of the liberal blue state of Oregon. From the New York Post the other day came this from Anthony Blair, and he says a Portland, Oregon jury has cleared a black man of assault charges for stabbing a white man after it was revealed that the victim said the N-word after the attack. Are you following me here? This is crazy. Gary Edwards, who's 43, was found not guilty of second-degree assault after knifing Gregory Howard Jr., also 43, on July 7th of this year. This was reported by KPTV. And Edwards admitted to stabbing Howard Jr. He admitted it, but claimed it was in self-defense after the victim had used racial slurs. Both men are homeless and have lengthy rap sheets. The video from the transit cameras showed Edwards approach Howard, who was sitting on a bench from behind with a fixed blade knife in his hand. And as soon as Howard sees Edwards, he jumps up and starts pushing him. And the pair briefly scuffle against the wall before Edwards suddenly stabs Howard in the shoulder. There is no audio on the video, but Edwards' defense attorney, Daniel Small, told the jury his client was approaching Howard to see if he would trade his knife for cigarettes. Police body camera footage captured Howard calling Edwards the N-word in the aftermath of the attack, and after the cops rushed over to intervene. And Howard claimed he only used the racial slur after being stabbed. But Edwards testified that the victim called him the the word the moment that he saw him. Quote, what other than racism could explain why Mr. Howard perceived hatred, animosity, and aggression from a complete stranger? Small told the jury. The prosecution said it was irrelevant what Howard said after the attack. I tend to agree. Prosecutors also argue that Edwards was always in control throughout the attack. Quote, the defendant is not scared for his life. He didn't retreat. He sauntered up and he sauntered away after he stabbed someone. The defendant created the situation. This is what prosecutor Catherine Williams told the jury. Edwards, who was acquitted on October 31st, has previous convictions for attempted second-degree assault in 2021, so it's not his first one, and was sentenced to 3 years in prison for a separate stabbing at a Portland Light Rail station in May of 2020. He was also accused of fourth-degree assault over a fight with a store clerk, but the case was dismissed in June because of a lack of available public defenders. So because they didn't have enough public defenders, free lawyers for him, the case got dismissed. Howard also has a lengthy rap sheet and was convicted of felony rape of a child in Kitsap County, Washington in 1997, records show. So you have a guy who's sitting on a bench. The guy comes up and stabs him, and he is acquitted by a jury. Why? Because he called him the N-word after he got stabbed. That's crazy. It's nuts. But it's not the only one. From Right Now, Oregon, comes this article, and it says the Washington County District Attorney's Office has moved to dismiss charges in 20 cases. They've moved to dismiss these cases involving drug-endangered children after a September Oregon Court of Appeals ruling significantly narrowed the state's ability to prosecute caregivers for exposing children to dangerous drugs. The decision, State versus Stevens, held that a caregiver who knowingly exposed an 18-month-old child to methamphetamine, resulting in detectable levels of drugs in the child's system, an 18-month-old, that it could not be convicted of first-degree criminal mistreatment based on failure to provide necessary and adequate care. The ruling applies to other controlled substances as well, making it far more difficult to arrest or prosecute adults who expose children to harmful drugs such as methamphetamine or fentanyl. Okay, so let me explain a little bit of what's going on here. We have a court of appeals who has ruled that if you're a parent and you have fentanyl or methamphetamine or whatever illegal drug in your home, that if the police find out, they come in, they find out that you have that there along with children, minors, then you cannot be convicted of endangering them. They can't be taken from the home. They have to stay with their druggy parents. Why? Because they haven't proven that the parents intentionally tried to harm their children. That the only way you can do that is if you can prove that the child was intentionally put in harm's way, that they intentionally tried to harm the child. The only way you're gonna prove that as a prosecutor is if they just come out and say, "Yeah, I'm evil and I tried to do that." Come on. As a result, the Washington County DA's office is dismissing 20 pending cases in which children tested positive for controlled substances, including methamphetamine, marijuana, and fentanyl. Prosecutors say these cases involve children living in environments where adults were actively using drugs, conditions that pose severe risks, including overdoses and death. Quote, this ruling makes it more difficult to protect children and to hold accountable those who threaten their well-being, said Washington County District Attorney Kevin Barton. Caregivers and parents who knowingly expose children to dangerous drugs to the point where they test positive should be held accountable. We are committed to pursuing legislation in the upcoming short legislative session to address the problem. That's not going to happen, just so you know, because Oregon has a very liberal legislature and a very liberal governor, and so there's no way they're gonna do that. Shelley Smith, executive director of Oregon Child Abuse Solutions, echoed the same concerns, saying that we are committed to trying to change this, but again, good luck with that, right? The Oregon District Attorney Association and the Washington County DA's office are pushing for the new legislation to close the gap on the Stevenson decision. So, but Oregon is not the only place that has this liberal ideology when it comes to our judicial system. In fact, this comes out of Minnesota, and we talked a little bit about this on a FOMO Friday. But by this article is by Adam Sabres, and he writes for Fox News, and it came out the first of this month. It said a judge in Minnesota is facing heat after she overturned a guilty verdict. She overturned the guilty verdict for an individual convicted in a $7.2 million fraud scheme that involved taxpayer money. Okay, but first of all, if you see a picture of this judge, she looks like she's about 15 max. But anyway, this person, his name is Abdafat Yasuf, and his wife, Lul Ahmed, were charged in June of 2024 after they were accused of stealing $7.2 million from the state's Medicare program while running a home health care business that lacked an office building to operate for years out of a mailbox. So basically, they didn't have a building. They didn't have any place for to distribute any kind of services or anything like that. They just had a mailbox where they collected $7.2 million. This is part of that Somali fraud scheme that was happening up in Minnesota. Prosecutors said that Yusuf received Medicaid money for services that weren't provided and overbilled for services that didn't have documentation. Yusuf allegedly used the money to fund a lavish lifestyle that includes shopping sprees at luxury clothing stores, including Coach and Canada Goose. I'm sorry, I don't know what Canada Goose is. Anyway, upper scale store, it sounds like. Michael Kors, again, not sure. Third Degree Heat, and I've heard of that. Nike, of course, and Nordstrom's, of course. Now, Yusuf directed over $1 million from the business account to his personal account, and also withdrew over $387,000 in cash, according to the Attorney General's office. While Yusuf was found guilty of 6 counts of aiding and abetting theft by swindle of over $35,000 in August by a jury, the decision was overturned by Judge Sarah West in November, according to CARE, K-A-R-E. West wrote in her decision that the case, quote, relied heavily on circumstantial evidence, adding that the state didn't rule out other potential reasonable inferences. Really? What would be a reasonable inference in this case? The judge added that she was, however, troubled by the manner in which fraud was able to be perpetrated at Promise Health. So, obviously she did this, rather easily, and I'm really troubled that she was able to do that, but I'm going to let her off for doing it. Does that make sense to you? Minnesota State Rep Kristen Robbins said that she was shocked upon hearing the guilty verdict was overturned. The jury, four-person, in Yusuf's case, Ben Walfort, said that the decision to convict wasn't complicated and was confused by West's decision. said that it was not a difficult decision whatsoever. The deliberation took probably 4 hours at most, based off of the state's evidence that was presented. It was beyond a reasonable doubt, he said. I'm shocked. I'm shocked based off of all of the evidence that was presented to us and the obvious guilt that we saw based off of the said evidence. Another jury member told the outlet that we all came to an agreement pretty easily. Yusuf's attorney, his name is Ian Burrell, praised West for the decision and said that his client was wrongfully accused, according to Kerr. Yeah, sure. The Minnesota Attorney General's office, led by Democrat Kenneth Ellison, has filed an appeal of West's decision to overturn the verdict. And Minnesota has grappled with, of course, that fraud problem, including the freeing of future schemes, feeding our future scheme, which involved hundreds of millions of dollars in embezzled COVID-19 funds. I mean, we're just scratching the surface really here. The alleged fraud stems from Minnesota's Medicare Housing Stabilization Services Program, that Feeding Our Future program, and a bunch of others. President Donald Trump on November 21st terminated deportation protections for Somalis in Minnesota, claiming that they're scamming billions of dollars, and that we know that there is billions of dollars missing from those programs, and it as what it looked like at the first blush, it might be up to $1 billion. We're looking at billions now that have been defrauded. The decision came after a report from the Manhattan Institute, which is a conservative think tank, that alleged that millions of dollars were being funneled to Al-Shabaab, which is a Somali terrorist group related to the Feeding Our Future scam. So the dollars leaving taxpayers here in the U.S., going over to Somali, where they're basically supporting a terrorist organization over there. But at least our federal Supreme Court has a majority of conservative judges. So we see all of these different things here, these different examples that I could go on and on. But like I say, at least our federal Supreme Court has a majority of conservative judges on it. Or when I say conservative, I mean constitutionalists. They don't believe that they are legislators trying to make law. They believe that they should take a look at the cases in front of them and determine whether or not they're constitutional or not. And there are 2 cases coming before them that will be very important, I think, in whether Americans continue to lose faith in the judiciary or not. One of them is about a Christian evangelist and his street preaching, and I found an opinion piece by Leif Lemonnier, who writes for the Daily Wire, and he says that a Christian evangelist battle with a Mississippi city over street preaching took center stage at the Supreme Court on this last Wednesday, as the judges heard arguments that could have far-reaching consequences for Americans who went to defend their constitutional rights in federal court. The case resolves around whether a 33-year-old Gabrielle Oliver Gabriel Oliver, not Gabriel. Gabriel Oliver can challenge an ordinance from Brandon, Mississippi, that restricted street preaching in a public park outside of a local amphitheater. Now, Oliver, who was convicted in 2021 of street preaching outside of the designated area, is now attempting to overturn the ordinance on First Amendment grounds. Okay, so this perked my ears up, right? Here's the quote. "This is a really important case for Christians specifically, because I notice that all around the country, there's always an exercise of free speech that does not seem to be cracked down on the way that Christians' free speech is nowadays." This is what Oliver told the Daily Wire. Now, the city of Brandon argues that Oliver cannot challenge the ordinance in federal court because he has previously been convicted of violating it. Oliver says that he doesn't want to revisit the 2021 conviction, for which he paid a fine, but he wants to protect his right to share his faith in the future. During an oral argument on this last Wednesday, the justices seemed sympathetic to Oliver's arguments that he should be able to seek relief in federal court despite his previous conviction. Nate Kellum, a lawyer with First Liberty Institute representing Oliver, told the Daily Wire that he was encouraged by the questions that he heard from the justices. And Kellum said that all that he wants is for Oliver to have his day in court to argue against the ordinances and make an appeal for his First Amendment rights. He says everybody, regardless of their ideology and their belief, deserve their day in court. And Oliver said, we're just asking that people would continue to pray for us. The Trump administration is supporting Oliver's petition, as are a number of other conservative organizations. The ordinance implemented by Brandon, Brandon is a suburb east of Jackson, by the way, in Mississippi there, and it restricts protest activity to the park surrounding the city's amphitheater to a designated area where events are being held. Quote, what the ordinance does is it puts him in a place where no one can hear him, said Cullum. You can't have a conversation. You can't hand out literature. If he preaches, he cannot be heard. And if he held up a sign, no one could read it. And so that seems to be the whole idea, is that the city wanted to pass a law that separated him from his would-be audience. And the city and some legacy outlets have attempted to suggest that Oliver shouted rude and inappropriate things during the previous outing at the park. And quote, here's the quote, it's patently false, and it seems to be an attempt to try to malign Gabe, malign his character, is what Kellum said. And he also said, but if Gabe or anyone else would say anything that would amount to fighting words or could be something that could lead to an altercation, there's disorderly conduct ordinances. So Oliver first went to the park in 2019, where he had productive conversations, actually, about his faith with others. But when he returned in 2021, the city had passed an ordinance against such evangelism, such terrible evangelism going on. His passion for street evangelism comes from his own conviction 10 years ago after he encountered a street preacher himself. He says, I see it very clearly as a command in Scripture, he said, and so I choose to do that and exercise the rights that we have enjoyed here in America. And we would like an opportunity to continue to fight for those rights to be upheld. I mean, how do you argue with that, right? Todd Butler, the attorney representing Brandon, said in a statement that the city of Brandon was excited to present its position to the court. The case before the Supreme Court is not about the constitutionality of the ordinance or religious expression. Yeah, sure it's not. How is it anything other than that? He said it is about whether a person who has been found guilty in a criminal court may undermine his conviction through a court tort lawsuit. The importance of this case cannot be overstated, as it will impact cities across the country. Yeah, of course. That's why I brought it forward to you, because I think it's going to be a very important one. But in another case, and one that I referred to earlier, and it talks about that fourth branch. I told you there's three branches. There's the executive, the judiciary, there's the congressional legislative. But one of the things that Congress has done over the years is kind of really developed a fourth branch. And Ben Shapiro, I thought, did a really good job in an opinion piece that he presented in talking about this. He says the Supreme Court is looking at the possibility of ensuring that the federal executive branch is a unitary executive. So, in other words, here, and this is from the New York Times report, he says that as a young staff member in the Reagan administration, John G. Roberts Jr. was part of a group of lawyers who pushed for more White House control over independent government agencies. The time may be ripe to reconsider the existence of such entities and take action to bring them back within the executive branch. The future Chief Justice of the United States advised the White House counsel in 1983 in a memo stating just that. The independent agencies, he wrote, were a constitutional anomaly. Of course they are, because they weren't set up. We don't have 4 branches of government. Once he ascended to Supreme Court Chief Justice, Roberts joined the other conservatives on the bench in a series of rulings that have chipped away at Congress's power to constrain the president's authority to fire independent regulators. The real question here is this: where in the Constitution do you find the idea of independent regulators? It does not exist. We have 3 branches of government, and in order of power, it's supposed to be legislative, executive, and judicial. And that said, all of these are unitary powers. The president is not supposed to implement legislative power, which is why many of the regulatory agencies that currently exist should be ruled unconstitutional. If there are unelected agencies writing laws, which is what regulations are, there is no mode for that under the Constitution of the United States. Simultaneously, there is no independent 4th branch of government set up by Congress that is not answerable to the executive branch, but only answerable to Congress. There's nothing like that anywhere in the Constitution. There will be a case argued in the Supreme Court over whether President Trump can fire people across the federal government in defiance of laws meant to protect their jobs and shield them from politics. The court's majority will likely side with Trump on this one. We're hoping anyway, which makes perfect sense, because there is nowhere in the Constitution where it says Congress has the power to set up an agency inside the executive branch that the president of the United States cannot run. This case revolves around whether President Trump can fire Rebecca Slaughter, a Democratic member of the Federal Trade Commission, simply because he says she does not align with his agenda. That firing could be despite a law that says the president can only remove commissioners for inefficiency, neglect of duty, or malfeasance in office. The administration is asking the justices to toss out a 90-year-old precedent that said that the Constitution allowed laws like the one and put limits on the president's authority to dismiss some quasi-independent government officials. There are 24 other agencies, 24 other agencies charged with protecting consumers and workers and the environment or nuclear safety. They have been insulated from complete presidential control by similar laws. One of the points Trump makes is that he's doing the obvious thing. Democrats have been firing these people by ginning up cases against them for a very, very long time. And this is also how they manage to maintain control of the regulatory state even after they lose an election. This is what Trump would label the so-called deep state, right? Bunch of bureaucrats all over the place. Trump has repeatedly ousted Democratic leaders, including the National Labor Relations Board and the Merit System Protection Board and the Consumer Product Safety Commission, things like that, to make way for the replacements who share his policy priorities. And that makes perfect sense, does it not? Why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you be able to, as president, do that? So, he concludes here, Ben concludes here, he says, I hope that the Supreme Court carries through on all of that. That would be a genuinely positive development if the Supreme Court actually sides with the Constitution on this one. Again, these are two cases going before the Supreme Court that they have an opportunity to help maintain that the faith that we as citizens have in our judiciary. Justice is one of the main reasons God created government, and it needs to do its job. In many cases, it hasn't been doing its job, but we're hoping that this is a turning point, that as we see the Supreme Court and how they're going to rule, and as we start to see some of these liberal judges, stop promoting their ideology through their decisions, we could again stop the erosion of faith in our judiciary. I would love to hear what you think on it. And of course, you can always do that at uncommonsensepodcast.com. Thank you very much for listening.
This podcast is a production of Morganite Communications.